Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of January 7th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles that take a look at the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and set an increase in movement in the market. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the 5 books that are considered to be the trending books this week. But before I get into the video, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps with the channel, doing those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into this video here today. Now, of course, I'll put a link in the description. You guys know the drill by now. So let us jump right into it, starting with the 5th hottest trending book of the week. And the book we're talking about, of course, is Superman, the Man of Steel, number 18, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 66th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1992, written by Louis Simonson, and would feature the first full appearance of the villainous character known as Doomsday. Now, you guys remember this book. Of course, you guys know who Doomsday is. Doomsday is the villain that actually was able to kill Superman. We got a version of that storyline and a version of this character in the Batman vs. Superman Zack Snyder film. And when we got that film, this is one of those books that definitely kind of shot up in the market, blew up really, really fast, kind of had that, rocket moon jetpack strapped to it all the way back in 2013 and 2015. And ever since then has definitely kind of fallen off and kind of where it sits today. It's slowly starting to kind of trend back up due to the James Gunn effect. Now, we've talked about the James Gunn effect on the channel here before. Obviously, you guys know that James Gunn is taking over the DC universe, and a lot of people are really starting to look back towards those DC keys. And then we know that if they're going to do a new version of Superman, they're probably going to revisit a Doomsday storyline at some point in the future. Even though it feels like this story has been done, it does feel like Doomsday is a very, very important villain to sort of have in the Superman mythos, and it would make a lot of sense that this book would kind of come back into the comic book zeitgeist, so to speak. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 4,226 universal copies on the census. 9.9s, there's actually 5 of them, but 9.8s have 2181. Fair market value suggests 100. 30-day moving is 137, so slightly starting to trend up once again. And this is a book that has a very interesting graph. You can see this is one that shot up when we initially got the Man of Steel, Zack Snyder Superman film. A lot of people were already speculating back then, and then it kind of had its dip, then it had another blow up when we got the Batman vs. Superman movie, which actually featured Doomsday, and then like books do after the movie, they completely fall off into obscurity, and this book has slowly been trending up, had its 2021 boom, then had the pullback of the correction like we are in the current market, and as you can see, is trending back up again. So this is one of the interesting things about books of this era, the Copper Age books most specifically. I'm almost complete with my Copper Age index, and I'm starting to see trends that are similar to that of what we just saw with the graphs right there, where the Copper Age, books have so much more volatility, and there was a lot of books that, had these spikes even outside of the 2021 boom. Down here at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed to the low grade. It's a 1992 book, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can see them being sold around that $15 to $20 range. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week, and the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is a very interesting one right here, but this is Nita Ha's Nightmare Blog number 1, Rabbit Comics Edition A, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 48th slot. Say that 5 times fast. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 2021 that was drawn by Rodney Barnes and would be a variant cover issue of a spin-off series of Philadelphia. Now, you guys may not have heard of this book, as it is the first time it's shown up on this list, but I'm sure you guys are well aware of Philadelphia, which of course was a book that came out in 2019, kind of diving into the horror, supernatural, vampire mythos, and has been one of the kind of modern books out there that has been heavily speculated on to be optioned into some TV show or made into some kind of movie on some streaming service later on down the line. In fact, I do actually think that it was announced to be optioned, but whether or not we actually get the show still remains to be seen. I mean, I've had discussions on this channel before about what I think about options. I think options are interesting, but they are a long way away from actually being realized onto a screen. And once they even get on the screen, who's to say that they won't actually be canceled after season 1? So, it's interesting to see the market move on options, but those people are going to be waiting quite a long time for their books to pay off, if they in fact ever do pay off. But kind of cool to see a book like this show up. It definitely feels like one that, is probably showing up in the trending list simply due to the fact that, all it takes is a few purchases of a book to all of a sudden cause it to have relevancy in the market. Maybe there's a handful of people that were specking on this thing or just really, really enjoyed the art, because I got to say, it is very, very cool. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s only have 28 on the census. Fair market value is 26. 30-day moving moving is 19, so only a handful of sales for this book overall, but you can see that there's been quite a lot of them, even in these last like couple months or so. So will be interesting to see what happens with this book. Of course, when you go onto eBay looking for raw grade copies, you can find, a decent amount of them being sold basically at cover around that $5 to $10 range. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is kind of a fun one to see on the list, but this book right here is New Mutants #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 40th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1983, February of 1983, Swaggle birthday month and year. That is right, I just told you guys my real age, but this right here is, of course, the book written by Chris Claremont that would feature the first ongoing series for the New Mutants and would also be the third appearance of the team. Now, of course, we got that New Mutants movie that came out a few years back. I'm sorry that I had to be the one to remind you that that movie actually existed. Although, I saw it on an airplane and it wasn't as bad as I think a lot of people made it. It wasn't very good, but people were calling it like one of the worst movies that was ever made. But it was interesting to see how that movie had an effect on the New Mutants books overall. There was some speculation going on with this particular book right here, and this is just one of those books that people like to have in their collection. I think the New Mutants run gives a lot of member berries for a lot of those 80s collectors out there in the market, and a lot of the 80s titles just kind of look good in slabs and on shelves. So these are always going to be books that sell. These are always going to be books that get interest in the market, and I think kind of where prices are now with everything pulling back. I mean, it's such a low entry point into a book like this once again that I think a lot of people are thinking, hey, now's a good time as any to pick up that 9.8 copy. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. There's actually a couple 10s on the census, which I think are pretty interesting. A few 9.9s, and then 9.8s have 1,663 on them. Fair market value is 120. 30-day moving is 117, which is up from the 90-day moving. And this is another book, kind of like the Doomsday one, and eventually what we're going to see with X-Men 4 as well, where, there's different points in time where this book has seen, peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys. Of course, all the way back in 2015, this would have been the first time we heard about the New Mutants movie coming, so it had a spike then, had a pullback, the movie was pushed, then kind of went up again in 2018 when we got the movie, then, had a pullback once again, and then kind of went up once again in the comic book market of 2021, and now kind of where the book sits, basically selling around that $100 level. I mean, this is as cheap a time as you could have bought this book since the entire, speculation of all the movies coming out. So very interesting to sort of see that if you're somebody out there who just sort of always wanted this book, but you didn't want to have to pay for, the prices of the speculation. I think that that's why this book is starting to trend once again. And of course, being a 1983 book, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade very often, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically you can see them being sold around that $10, $15, $20 range. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is a classic one, an old favorite of the Go Collect trending list. But this one, of course, is Nova #1, up 64 spots, now sitting in the 28th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1976, written by Marv Wolfman, that would feature the first appearance of Richard Rider Nova. Now, of all the characters expected to come to the MCU, it feels like Nova has been one of those characters where everyone just keeps looking at their watch. I mean, when is this guy going to finally show up in the MCU? I mean, I feel like it's been, 8 years of speculation for Nova to be coming to the MCU ever since Feige had been hinting at the fact that he wanted to include this character. So a lot of people have been kind of talking about Nova. This book has been spec'd on ever since we got Guardians of the Galaxy. And then finally, this last year, it was announced that Nova was going to be getting some kind of property in the MCU. Now, people don't know if that's going to be a Disney Plus show. People don't know if that's going to be a special feature presentation. We also don't know if it's going to be a movie. In fact, I bet if you were to ask Kevin Feige, he probably still doesn't know, because I think there's a lot of moving parts with what Nova may want to be. Now, there's a lot of speculation that we might be getting the Sam Alexander of Nova. I still think that Richard Rider is the most likely version to show up, but maybe we are going to be getting both. And this book right here is, of course, one that, has that sort of tumultuous journey as far as values are in the market, because there's times when people are hot on this book and there's times when people are cold on it, but it is still a great Bronze Age classic book to have in your collection. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 536 on the census. Fair market value is 1,650. 30-day moving is 1,700. And actually, let me highlight the universal copies here. 7,693. Not like the most for a Bronze Age book, but definitely a higher slab book in general for books at this particular time. The 9.8s have had an interesting journey overall where, like I was saying, this is a book that has been spec'd on for many, many years. I mean, when we got Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, this book was already being spec'd on in that 2014 area, then kind of had its pullback. Then it was spec'd on again in 2018 and 2019. A lot of people were saying that, Nova was going to show up in Guardians 2. There was even speculation that he was going to show up in Infinity War in Endgame. I think that there was actually, talk of the Russo brothers saying that they might have showed Xandar or Thanos getting the Power Stone. So people thought we might see Nova there. That didn't happen. Of course, we had its pullback in 2020, shot back up in 2021, shot massively up in early 2022 when we got the official announcement for this character. And then this thing has been on the pullback ever since. So now kind of where it sells, basically selling less than 2021 prices, but still more than the original speculation for this book. I think there's more movement in the market and more people wanting to buy back into this thing. And then of course, this is a book that has a little bit of value depending on what grade you're sort of looking at, but definitely could be one of those books where, the raws start to outsell the graded copies, even if the raw isn't as nice as that respective graded copy. And speaking of those raws, when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $70 to $100 range. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is another classic book, one of the key books from the Copper Age, in my opinion. But this one right here is X-Men #4, up 52 spots, now sitting in the number 10 slot, the 10th most bought and sold book out there in the market. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1992, written by Jim Lee and John Byrne, and would feature the first appearance of the villainous character known as Omega Red. Now, this is a funny book to talk about. Of course, Omega Red, I think, is a fan favorite character, especially if you're a kid who grew up in the sort of that 90s speculation boom. I mean, Omega Red sort of brings us all back to this Jim Lee run in the X-Men animated series. And I think for that reason, a lot of people have nostalgia for the character. But one of the reasons that this book has been so tumultuous in the market was due to the fact that Omega Red had been speculated to be showing up in the Falcon and Winter Soldier show, and this is one of those books that really blew up in 2021. I mean, that was the height of the comic book boom, right when that show was coming out. And when you kind of step back and think about it, I mean, was this really ever a significant rumor at all? I mean, does it even make sense that they would have brought Omega Red into that show? I mean, I could have bought the fact that maybe Omega Red would show up in the Black Widow film due to the Russia connection, but I don't really understand why Falcon and Winter Soldier was the show that people were thinking that they were going to show up in. I mean, we haven't even officially got the mutants yet, but for whatever reason, this was one of the books that got extremely hot in the market, and where it sells now is kind of, once again at that point where the entry point is so low, it's so safe. I mean, what is the downside risk to buying a 9.8 at this particular point that a lot of collectors are thinking, hey, I like this run, gives me the member berries, I want it in a slab, and I want it on my shelf. And that is probably the reason why it is the #1 book trending this week. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 10,932 on the census. Quite a lot of copies out there. There's only one 9.9 right there, which, can I just say for a second, 10,932 copies, one 9.9. You mean to tell me of the M&M Spotlight variants, there were, a print run of 5,000. We got a 9.9 out of that. I don't buy it. Sorry, guys. I know we're talking about the trending comics, but of course I'm going to bring up the M&M book. Anyways, let's move on here. 9.8s have 4,460 copies on the census. Fair market value is 130. 30-day moving is 126. And as you can see, this is a book that has had, kind of another tumultuous journey in its history where it had, speculation all the way back in 2014, had some speculation here in 2018, kind of lifted once again in 2020, and then rocket ship Moon Boy all the way up in April of 2021 to around the $350, $400 range. And as you can see, ever since then, we've been on the big Space Mountain downtrend all the way to where we are now, to where this book sells at the $133 range. I mean, how much lower could it go? I suppose it could go to $100, but $30 more. I mean, really, what is the difference at that particular point? If you're somebody who just kind of wants to have this book in your collection, which again is one of the reasons why I think it is showing up on this list and why it is, kind of such a safe entry point buy at this particular time. Then, of course, 1992 book, not going to see it slabbed at a low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically they sell around that $20 to $25 to maybe $40 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. Anyways, that's all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics of the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I'll see you in the next video.